We got a thing going on.
You had some court proceedings against Gamble and Huff recently. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I don't talk about it too much because, me and Kenny was together last week. Benefited us both. Because we both were getting ripped off.
Uh-huh.
By the record company.
He gave the world Me and Mrs. Jones, but behind the smooth vocals and platinum plaques, Billy Paul was fighting a silent war. In his final years, he was not just reflecting on his career, he was pointing fingers at record labels, at producers, at the machine that made him and may have tried to erase him.
Me and Mrs. Jones.
When Me and Mrs. Jones hit the airwaves in 1972, it was undeniable. A slow, sensual anthem with rich orchestration and Billy Paul's unique voice guiding every line. The song reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned Paul a Grammy Award. But while the record was a commercial success, its subject matter quietly stirred controversy. The lyrics detail a secret affair between two lovers, both married to other people. It was not subtle, it was not coded, it was direct. "We got a thing going on" became a cultural phrase, but not everyone was celebrating. Critics accused Paul of romanticizing infidelity. Church groups protested the song's heavy radio rotation. Some radio stations even hesitated to play it, claiming the message was too provocative for mainstream audiences. Billy Paul did not shy away from the backlash. In interviews, he defended the song's emotional complexity, saying it was a true story inspired by real-life situations. To him, it was not about glorifying cheating. It was about exploring the vulnerability, guilt, and consequences that come with it. But Paul's honesty did not land well with everyone in the industry. According to some in his circle, this early controversy was the beginning of a long pattern, one where Paul's authenticity and refusal to stay quiet put him at odds with the gatekeepers. They wanted hits, not hard truths. And while Me and Mrs. Jones became a timeless record, Paul often said it also became a cage. The industry wanted him to stay in that lane. Love songs, nothing political, nothing risky. But Paul had other things to say, and that tension between the man and the machine would only grow louder. Years later, when Paul began opening up about how he was treated behind the scenes, he pointed to this moment, the peak of his success, as the moment they tried to lock him into a box. They did not want the truth, he once said in a radio interview. They wanted a formula. And just when he thought he'd proven himself, his boldest work started getting buried, not by the public, but by the very system that once called him their star. Billy Paul was not just a love balladeer, he had something to say. After the massive success of Me and Mrs. Jones, he pivoted to songs like Am I Black Enough for You, confronting race, identity, and injustice head on. But almost overnight, radio stations stopped playing his records, promoters pulled back, labels looked the other way. It was not because the music lacked quality, it was because it carried a message that industry did not want to amplify. In 2003, Paul took legal action against Assorted Music and Philadelphia International Records, the very machine that had helped launch him to stardom. His claim that he was systematically underpaid royalties for his biggest hits, including the one that made him a household name. According to court documents, Paul alleged that millions of dollars were missing. He said he never received fair payment for the commercial use of his songs, not from radio, not from TV, not from overseas plays. For decades, he had watched the label flourish while he struggled to collect what he was owed. But this was not just about money. For Billy Paul, this lawsuit symbolized everything wrong with the music business, especially how it treated black artists. In interviews, he expressed how common it was for singers like him to be signed young, worked hard, then discarded, and when they finally spoke up, they were labeled difficult or worse, blackballed. "They robbed me with a smile," he once said. The lawsuit cracked open a long-standing issue, the way contracts were structured in the 70s and how many artists had signed away control without fully understanding the fine print. Paul was not the only one speaking out, but he was one of the few with a legacy hit tied to a billion-dollar music engine. Behind the scenes, it's said that Paul's legal moves put him on an industry watch list. Producers stopped calling, projects fell through. And as the lawsuit dragged on, Paul's name began to fade from major festivals, tributes, and TV specials where other soul legends were honored. His wife, Blanche, stood by him through it all and often serving as his business partner and fiercest advocate. She claimed that fighting for what Billy was owed came with a cost, a high one. But Paul never backed down. "If I do not speak up, they'll keep doing it to the next man," he said. What started as a legal fight turned into a moral stand, one that would slowly unravel his relationships with the very people he once trusted the most.
You had some court proceedings against Gamble and Huff recently. Can you tell us about that?
Got a thing going on.
At the heart of Billy Paul's rise and later his fall were two names, Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, the legendary producers behind Philadelphia International Records, the men who created the very sound that put Billy Paul on the map, and the same men he later accused of betrayal. In public, Gamble and Huff were seen as visionaries. They gave the world lush orchestral soul, a soundtrack of black excellence. But behind the studio walls, their relationships with artists were often rooted in tight contracts and absolute control. And according to Paul, that control came with a price. Paul was not just a client, he was one of the original voices of their empire. So when he claimed he was being systematically underpaid and erased, it hit hard. In his own words, Paul said, "They did not want me to succeed." He believed Gamble and Huff viewed his independence as a threat, that when he stopped cooperating and started asking questions about money, royalties, publishing, they began cutting him out. It was not just personal tension, it was about the politics of ownership. Gamble and Huff had built an empire under the banner of black ownership in music, yet Billy Paul claimed he was treated no differently than artists under exploitative major labels. He alleged they used his voice, his image, and his success, but gave him almost no say in how it was used or monetized. The streets say Gamble in particular had taken issue with Paul's unwillingness to follow orders, especially when Paul pushed back on song choices or spoke up about political issues in his music. One former associate claimed Paul's hit, "Am I Black Enough for You?" almost did not get released because Gamble feared it was too radical for white audiences. Whether or not the tension was personal or purely business, one thing was clear. Billy Paul felt betrayed by the very camp that once called him family. He did not mince words in interviews, he did not sugarcoat his disappointment, and he never forgot who he held responsible for the quiet shutdown of his career. In Paul's eyes, Gamble and Huff were once musical brothers, but by the end, they were just businessmen.
Well, I don't talk about it too much because, me and Kenny was together last week. It was business.
Yeah.
But it was a business move. And it was a business move. Actually, it was a business move that benefited us both. Because we both were getting ripped off.
Uh-huh.
Billy Paul believed the music industry turned its back on him, not because he lost talent or drive, but because of politics, money, and power. After the falling out with Gamble and Huff, Paul said he was shelved. According to him, once their relationship soured, promotional efforts around his work stopped. New releases were not pushed, airplay declined, concert bookings dried up. To many, it looked like the machine that once made him a star had suddenly stopped working, deliberately. Paul himself did not shy away from calling it what he felt it was, sabotage. In interviews, he said plainly that he believed he had been blackballed, and not just by individuals, but by an entire system that controlled radio distribution and public exposure. Whether it was out of spite for the lawsuit or discomfort with his political messages, Billy believed he was being silenced. Industry insiders have since whispered similar things. Some say that after his legal battle, Billy Paul became hard to market. Others say he was too vocal, too confrontational, or simply not willing to play along with label politics. He demanded transparency. He asked where the money went, and in an industry where silence and loyalty are often rewarded over honesty, that made him a liability. The street began to talk too. Many fans noticed the shift. One year he was everywhere, the radio, TV specials, festivals. Then suddenly nothing, no major label push, no Grammy buzz, no high-profile collaborations. For someone with a Grammy-winning global hit, it did not add up. And what hurt even more was watching younger or more manageable artists, often from the same label, get the support he felt he earned. It was not just about money, it was about legacy. Billy Paul felt erased from the history he helped write. In his later years, he looked back at those decisions with a sense of betrayal. He said he stayed true to the message, to the art, and to his integrity, but that integrity may have come at a price, one that cost him mainstream recognition, industry support, and perhaps peace. What remained was a man who once stood at the center of Philly soul, now watching from the sidelines. For all the headlines, lawsuits, and theories, what Billy Paul really wanted was simple: respect. Not just for me and Mrs. Jones, but for the full body of work that came after it. He wanted people to hear the message behind songs like Am I Black Enough for You? He wanted his political soul music to be heard loud, not buried. And more than anything, he wanted people to know that he never sold out.
I always wanted to be a regular person because I figured I can be a star.
By the 2000s, Billy Paul was still touring, still performing, but so often overseas where audiences appreciated his deeper cuts. In Europe, he was welcomed as a soul icon. In interviews, you could still hear the fire in his voice. He had not forgotten what happened, but he was not begging for sympathy. He just wanted the truth out. The street kept his name alive. DJs still spun his records at underground soul parties. Collectors paid high prices for vinyl copies of albums the industry barely promoted. Hip-hop producers sampled him, and his voice appeared in tracks that younger generations danced to, even if they did not know his name. His influence lingered quietly in corners the mainstream did not spotlight, but Paul remained bitter toward the system. He said it never gave him the full credit he deserved, not just for the hits, but for the messages, the risks, the soul he poured into everything. He believed the industry rewarded silence and punished truth tellers, and in his mind, he had told the truth. When he passed away in 2016, tributes poured in, but not from the same institutions that had once turned away. It was the people, the fans, the underground that celebrated him loudest. Billy Paul was never just a man with a hit song. He was a message, soulful, political, unfiltered, a voice that refused to bend even when the system pressed down. He exposed the price of integrity in an industry that often values obedience over honesty. The street says he was silenced, others say he was simply too real. But what's clear is this: Billy Paul left a blueprint for artists who dare to speak up, ask questions, and fight for more than just fame. And for those paying attention, his voice is still playing. You just have to listen beyond the hits. That will be all for now. Please like, comment, and share. Goodbye.